Today on Rise Up, we begin with the latest episode of The Riser, where he sheds light on the true ruling of abortion and the path to divine mercy and inner healing. Next, a closer look at religion with Sister Kevin Al Al-Mahdi, where we dive deeper into the essence of faith and spiritual practice. Nature Unleashed with Kevin Al Al-Mahdi, discussing the reaction of the earth itself to mankind's injustices. And finally, we head to the comments section, where we engage with your thoughts and responses to our lecture series, The School of Divine Mysteries. This is Rise Up.
Good morning. Welcome to Rise Up. It's Monday the 31st of March, and I'm Irfan Alamgir.
And I'm James Pollard. Assalamu alaikum to you all. God bless you.
Peace be with you, and thank you very much for joining us. So we have a jam-packed show for you today on Rise Up. We're going to go through a plethora of topics. And James, I think before we launch into today's show, the show on abortion has caused a lot of interest. It's stirred a lot of interest and questions in the hearts and minds of the people, because it is such a politically hot and relevant topic, but also it is something that affects and impacts so many people's lives on a daily basis.
Abortion as a story is very controversial, but at the end of the day, it's something we cannot avoid tackling, because it's caused, like in America with pro-life and all these demonstrations and all these conflicting stories, even amongst people of the same religion, implies that they don't really have a grasp, or the scholars don't have a grasp of how to manage this situation. Yes. We see most of the scholars in the world today, they avoid the subjects because they do not have a clear understanding or analysis of how to deal with these matters.
Yes.
And when you're relying on a scripture from over 1,000 years ago, which we know has got distortions in it, how are you going to come up with a clear strategy to tackle these issues?
Very good point, James. It needs somebody who is present in the age that we live in, who is appointed by God, who has God's spirit of wisdom within him, to give us answers to these questions that you raised. And look, the reality on the ground is that people in the West in particular, we've seen this phenomenon of falling birth rates, and we're seeing the population levels slowly going down, creeping down. And this issue of abortion is really something that is addressed now with a great deal of nonchalance. So we think that there is somebody who gets pregnant, they are in their late teens, and they just think, well, this is going to throw a spanner in the works as far as my career is concerned. Yeah. It's just a piece of flesh that hasn't got any relevance or hasn't got any value or worth, and therefore if I take this pill, I can end this matter right now and live my life. And it's this lack of
it's a materialistic perspective as well. Lack of compassion, and it's taking, as you say, only the flesh aspect, whereas we know there is a mind, body and soul, but it's understanding at what point does that all take place?
Yes.
And who can ascertain that except for a man sent by God? Because I cannot, and you're a medical doctor, and you have a lot of understanding of these principles, but it's still within medical science. They cannot categorize this, can they?
Yes, James, and this is what we said in the episode when we did cover abortion back when Alia was here, Sister Alia, and we discussed it, and I explained very simply that I had been put in a position several times where women of all ages, by the way, not just young examples that I gave of a young teenager when I was just speaking, but women of all ages coming in requesting the morning after pill or treatment or referral to a clinic where they would perform the abortion. So this was part and parcel of my life for a long period of time, and these are cases that had to be addressed, and we would have meetings about how we would address this in terms of those doctors who professed religious faith versus those of us who were atheists or agnostics. So a real issue in the medical field, a real issue that affects many, many lives. And I think the interesting aspect of this is that if you're a sociologist, if you're somebody who is interested in the evolution of human behavior, of human society, then you would see that it is an interesting corrosion or erosion of Christian values, and the pattern as Christianity has gone down, abortion rates have gone up, and this association of the worship of the God of science seems to have really glazed over the subject with unconcern, with any kind of empathy or compassion, and it's become the norm where people are just like, okay, I'm going to take a pregnancy test. Okay, I'm not even going to bother with the pregnancy test. I'm just going to take the morning after pill and just deal with the situation there. And then I have a very busy life. I have goals and ambitions I want to accomplish. And having a baby at this stage without a stable partner is not a good life choice for me. And people they treat the matter quite trivially.
But you know what? If what's interesting for me, because I've known people in the past who've done these acts and they've been psychologically scarred, even though they claim they're doing it because they want to move on with their career and these kind of things. They've confided in me and they've told me that it scarred them for life. You know, as far as they're concerned, they're not comfortable with the decision they made, even though they did it in haste and they were granted the permission to do it by their medical practitioner.
By the government.
By the government, and they made that decision in haste and they regretted it ultimately. And even if they didn't regret it, they still felt psychologically scarred, or if there's something that's left behind that they perhaps shouldn't have done. And that's very concerning, because it means that there's a lot of women out there who are feeling like this.
But here's the thing also that this brings up is that, can we really hold an individual to account in this manner when society, who has propped up this extreme expectation on women, making life so challenging and difficult, people are unable, for example, James, to get on the property ladder. And they have to, really, their life has to be focused around earning as much money as possible, as quickly as possible, and having a child and being on benefits really does send you to the very back of the queue. So in a society that values this strong sense of independence and emphasizes this dedication and sacrifice and work ethic in order to make a living, this is not just trying to reach the very top now, we're talking about just to survive. Then how much of the onus and burden of responsibility falls on the individual, and how much on the society that creates these conditions that push people to make these choices? Now, as far as your last comment, James, which is really interesting, is that it is absolutely true that the people or the women who choose to undergo abortion, once the pregnancy has been confirmed, and the later on in the gestation that you get, in other words, the more form the fetus becomes in the womb, and then they have these quite invasive operations where they are literally dilating the uterus or the neck of the womb, and then they put in these devices which essentially chop up that which is inside of the uterus.
Would they declare it as a fetus at that
stage? And then they basically vacuum it out. So it's basically this thing. And there's another method.
That's harrowing.
Called dilatation and curettage, which is where you dilate the neck of the womb so you can access the contents of the uterus, and then you again scrape off with a needle, a surgical blade, the contents, which would be called the fetus, of course. And there are even more advanced techniques of doing it, and depending on which country you live in, the age at which the line is drawn gets further and further. It can depend on the country you live in, essentially. But the law is changing all the time in this regard, and the debate rages as to when a fetus is a human being.
For me, it's very disturbing as well, and I know with modern technology, we see with ultrasound scans and these kind of things, you can see visually that there seems to be some kind of being or creature that forms quite early. So just as a lay person like me, it would seem very concerning to take what looks like an individual creature and claim it's okay to kill it.
And just to finish off on that point that I was making, is that the reason I mentioned it is because those women who delay the abortion far into the gestational period, of course, on average, it's a 40-week gestation. So if for those going beyond 12, 13, 14 weeks, around that time, then there is a very strong association with post-operative, post-abortion depression. And I'm talking about extreme depression. There is this overwhelming sense that grabs women, and of course there's statistics published on this, and we also are trained to deal with these ladies. So for example, if somebody has an abortion about 8-9 weeks into gestation, then they are also given counseling, mental health counseling, because they do suffer from the effects of extreme depression. And there have been cases that were documented and discussed at several of the practices that I worked at where it got really, really bad. So these are cases that I've personally come across and we've discussed as a collective in terms of the practices that I worked at, but also it's a statistic that these women, like you said, James, they are people who go late into their gestation and develop mental health issues later on. It's a very well-known phenomenon. So there is a lot of things to uncover, but at the same time, there are cases where abortion should be dealt with in a completely different way. For example, a woman is brutally, violently raped and conceives as a result of it, or a child has such severe physical disability that they would not be able to have a life of any meaning or quality, and then in that situation there are exceptions. And we are learning this from the riser of the family of Muhammad, who gives us scriptural references to back his very logical conclusions pertaining to abortion. And this was all present within a beautifully made episode on abortion, less than an hour, covering this very tenuous topic that does evoke a lot of emotion and sensitivity and debate. So because of the amount of interest shown and because of the question that was raised, Sabah Sadiq, we wanted to just make sure that we close the loop on this topic by covering the last two episodes that the riser of the family of Muhammad, the Mahdi Aba as-Sadiq, is going to be talking about in abortion. So, James, it's a real hot topic, and I think the second half of the episode, which you weren't able to finish
on the last Rise Up show with Alia.
On the last Rise Up show with Alia, I think we should definitely close the loop and really look at these last two clips to be able to understand the rationale for the actions that a believer in God would resort to and take in this scenario. So, without further ado, let's go to our first clip of the day about abortion, and let's put it up for you now.
In Islam, there are differing opinions on it. And that's why you have, in many countries, you have the diya if you kill somebody. For example, in Egypt, if you run somebody over with a car, and that results in a person dying, you are obliged to pay a particular amount of money as restitution to the family of the deceased. In other countries like Iran and like Saudi Arabia, they allow amputations, and they also practice capital punishment. So if you kill somebody, you get killed. And also, for example, in Iran, you have the story of somebody who threw acid in the face of a woman, and the punishment was that acid was to be poured on their face. And in one narration from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet gives the people the choice between the two of them. So in the case, for example, of a murder, if a family member has somebody who was murdered, then he has the choice to request capital punishment and take the life of the murderer, or they can take a diya instead, a payment instead. And if the person who's guilty, if they're killed, right? Or if they pay the payment, and then it kind of like squares off. The karmic payment that's required of them is forgiven. They're forgiven. They're alleviated from the burden because they had to pay for their action. So it doesn't make sense that they would be killed and then also punished in the hereafter. And if the family accepted a payment, it doesn't make sense that they pay and then also they have to continuously pay for forever. So, in short, this is the stance of religion, the different religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, based on their texts in regards to life. And Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the overwhelming evidence, it very clearly states in all three religions that life begins at the very beginning with the seed or with the sperm, and that life is sacred and that we have to respect it and we have to protect it, and it is against the idea of abortions. as a general rule, meaning like that there's no excuses for it. There's no, for example, examples of rape. I'm not talking about rape. I'm not talking about incest right now. I'm just only talking about abortions in general, where two people engage in an act together and then one party or both of them decide that they want to terminate the pregnancy afterwards. This is not really allowed. But there's also no such thing as God never forgiving the individual if they do commit in abortion. They have to be held to account. They have to pay reparations for the lives that they took. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all forgiving, and He forgives the sins of His servants. Ahmad al-Hassan alayhi salam, he clarified that in terms of abortions are permissible in particular instances. He made it very clear that in terms of rape, a person who is carrying a baby that belongs to their rapist, that they are allowed to terminate or abort the pregnancy. And the reason for that is because the deed itself or the action itself was an evil one, and the fetus is seen as the fruits of an evil action or a sin in itself. And so the pregnancy can be terminated. Abortions are also permissible in circumstances where the mother's life is at risk. So if we have to choose between losing the mother, who's already outside of the womb as a grown adult human being, or between the life of a fetus that's inside, then we automatically choose the older of the two, or the one who's already been born, and that is the mother, the carrier of life. And we would terminate the pregnancy in order to save the life of the mother. That is halal and that is permissible. Another circumstance in which abortions are permissible is if the parents become aware of a medical condition that the child has that would severely limit their chances of survival after having been born. So we spoke about the mother's life, now we're talking about the child. So if the child, for example, was diagnosed with a particular, he was missing an organ, or he was missing some limbs, or he was diagnosed with a physical or mental disability that was so severe that it would limit their ability to live or survive, they would probably die early on in life, then it is more merciful and it's acceptable to terminate the pregnancy if the parents wish for. And so you can do that as well. But if the baby's healthy and the mother's not at risk, and the pregnancy was not as a result of incest or rape or anything of the sort, and the individuals willingly engaged in that act, then the life of the infant is sacred, but human beings still make mistakes. And in the event that a human being does make a mistake and they terminate the pregnancy, it does not mean that they should give up hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear that there is a way to restore justice or to kind of negate the karmic effects of that, and to and that is through the paying of a restitution or a diya. And that is 20 dinars, which is 20 times 250 euros approximately, or 20 times the price of a sheep. I'm using euros for you because The person who's asking the question is from Germany, but certainly the price of a sheep, for example, and the currency would differ from country to country. So somebody in Pakistan, it would be a different thing. But 1 dinar would equal 1 sheep. So whatever the price of a sheep is in your country, it would be times 20 of that price if they have an early abortion where, it is just a matter of having the first 2 weeks of pregnancy, essentially. And then after that, if it becomes a thing where the miscarriage leaves a clot of blood, then that is 40 dinars. And if it is a stage after that where the fetus begins to take shape, and there's clearly a head, or there's a tail, or there's the beginning of some limbs, then that would be 60 dinars. And once there is any sign of bones, then that means that the baby's senses have already begun to be developed, and that is when life is considered to be a human being. And so very clearly from the narration of the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, we see that the Imam is essentially saying that all life is sacred. If a human being kills, for example, an animal in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam, especially in Judaism and Islam, they would have to pay a payment to the owner of that animal in order to pay restitution for the act of aggression which they committed. So if for example, you have a cat and I kill your cat, I have to pay you. This is the Islamic law. Why? Because the cat's life is sacred. You cannot just let it pass by. And so the first 3 stages of the pregnancy, before the senses are developed, the sanctity of life is preserved, but it's not considered to be the same as a born human being or an adult human being. And we only consider that the fetus becomes like a human being at the final stage of the pregnancy, when the bones are formed and the senses are formed. From that point onwards, any sort of act of aggression against the baby, even though it's inside of the womb of the mother, is an act of aggression against a full-grown human being with life. Does that make it clear?
Does that make it clear? That's a question Abu Sadiq asks in the end of that clip, and there were so many different things covered in that very short clip. But I think it's fairly straightforward, James, and I think you were feverishly taking notes on at various stages of that clip. And what do you think is the most pertinent, the most salient points that people can take home and benefit from?
I think it's incredible how Abu Sadiq breaks down what is one of the most complex topics that all scholars really need to tackle, but they can't because they are not from God. And he breaks it down in such a fundamental way, and he clarifies fundamentally that life is sacred, and to take a life requires restitution. But when all is said and done, we have to break that down. We can't just say it is that, it's black and white. It's not black and white,
exactly.
and therefore it needs to be analysed, it needs to be broken down, and only a man of God can do that. And he backs it up, as ever, by the Quran and the Hadith from the family of Muhammad, as we critically see in this segment here. He talks about how, obviously, if it's consensual, then it's an issue that needs to be settled and has to have restitution, because karmic debt has to be paid. But obviously, if it's only 1 to 2 weeks, then the restitution is less. But if it forms a clot of blood, then it increases, and eventually, if it has bones, then it has senses, meaning the child now has senses. It is classified as a human being, and therefore a proper restitution must be paid in these circumstances, just as if you took the life of any other human being. But God is merciful, and if there is a restitution and people are fully regretful for their actions, then there can be forgiveness, and there is mercy from God, and that's very beautiful. But it's not just as simple as that. If there are issues concerning the living fetus, does it have health defects? Does it have potentially organs missing? or problems with limbs and this kind of stuff, potentially, then that raises more issues. And Abu Sadiq clarifies that changes everything, that the parents then have a decision over that. And that's a very beautiful understanding. And also, if the mother's life is at risk, then obviously, because the mother is already a living human being, then that takes precedence in that instance. And then finally, the big issue of an evil deed. If an evil deed has taken place, meaning rape or something like that, then fundamentally that changes everything, and the fetus can be aborted in that scenario. So I mean, how many things have been discussed, and I can't even express it in the clear way that Abu Sadiq has. But as a layperson, it's completely understood, and he's even classified that from narrations from the family of Muhammad, who are the Ark of Salvation, and evidently so. Because if you took this knowledge to a non-working scholar, what is going to be the result? There's going to be mayhem and psychological scarring, and most likely injustice served and karmic debt remains. And Abu Sadiq has come fundamentally to kill off all that karmic debt and to grant salvation to the souls. And these kind of analysis is enabling that. And that's very beautiful for the sake of humanity.
Yes, exactly. And Abu Sadiq makes it very clear that the mercy of God is greater than any sin that a man can commit. It is the absolute essence of God is rahmah, or mercy, and rahmah, interestingly, also means womb. So we have a caller, Amir from California.
Wow, that's an interesting place.
So yes, welcome to Rise Up, Brother Amir. How are you today?
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing good. Praise be to Imam Ali. Inshallah, you guys are doing well too.
So you're calling from California?
Yes, sir.
Good. What's the time over there?
Right now it's 2:34.
Wow, that's pretty early. Yeah?
That's what we call rising up.
Yeah, you are rising up in the middle of the night, it seems.
I had to be of service of the Imam of the time, and call in at the appropriate time.
Good. No, we appreciate your call. Do you have a question or a comment for us this morning, Amir?
Yeah, so personally, my background is I'm a more traditionalist, like Shia. I stick to the hadith of the Imams, and I see the Ahmadi religion argument to be quite compelling. Mm-hmm. I just had a question, because I was reading the translation of Mr. I believe his name, Abu Sadiq, on Hafta Sharif.
Yes.
And I know that the esoteric reality of those appointed by Allah and those who are emergent from Allah's essence, for example, like the Prophet Muhammad and his family, and also the Mahdis, they're from the same Nur. So my question was, one of the pages of the blessed book, Hafta Sharif, we know that the Imams, they're the tajalli, they're the manifestation of God into a human form. I want to know if this is also true with the Mahdis that come from the Imams, the 12 Mahdis, such as Ahmad al-Hassan and Abu Sadiq and after.
Okay, yes. So good question, brother. Very good question. Brother James, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, we know from the holy word of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, these are the nur, these are the lights, these are the manifestation of God in creation. In essence, as you say, from the Hafta Sharif, which is a deeply esoteric book, and for sure we need someone like Abu Sadiq or one of the holy Imams to help explain that to us. Just as Mufadal was a key student of Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, it needs a holy Imam, a man sent by God in order to ascertain the reality of this. But these are the people, these are the ones that have returned, who have reached the higher echelons, who have surpassed being a prophet messenger or just a pure believer. And by reaching the rank of Imam or Mahdi, they are a guide for humanity, and therefore they are of that esteemed rank and are therefore fit to guide humanity in all these affairs, and are the pure lights. They've amassed all the soldiers of light and disintegrated and dissolved all the soldiers of ignorance. Hence they are fit to guide us in these matters, and otherwise how could they be God in creation and be over us like Abu Sadiq is today, as a riser of truth? And they even say in some of the narrations, we are all Mahdis, don't they? we're all rising to?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and let's talk about it. If you read The Goal of the Wise, there is a chapter in the book in which Abu Sadiq gives the spiritual lineage of the Mahdis. And I think one of the topics that The Goal of the Wise very interestingly opens up is the different layers of reality. So there is the world, for example, of light, where light beings are produced as from this one light, which is the Nur Muhammadiyah, and then they manifest in that realm of existence. And then there is the world of the souls, the atom world, Alam al-Dar, referred to in Arabic, and this has various interesting translations, of course, very esoteric topics, but the world that directly affects our material reality is the soul world. In other words, we are the shadow. If you look at the allegory of the cave, the world that is most closely associated with this physical material world is the world of the souls, okay, the alim al-arwah. And now you have these soul families, and of course there is a soul, there's a family tree given in Goal of the Wise. And in other places in the book Goal of the Wise, you will see that the Mahdis are an extension of their spiritual forefathers. For example, it states that Imam Ali, from him is peace, one of the Ahlul Kisa, one of the first creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the sole father of Adam, peace be upon him. So Adam is a copy, as what I think is the example of the analogy given is like a Xerox copy of the soul of Ali bin Abi Talib. So likewise, Prophet Noah, who is an Ulul Azm prophet, he is a copy of the soul of Imam Ali. And as this copying process continues, rather like in a Xerox photocopy, the initial copies are very, very close to, but not completely identical to, the soul father or the soul ancestor from which they come. But as you go down the line, that kind of fades a little bit. So therefore, the creations that came first are more complete copies of their spiritual ancestor than the creations that came towards the end. So the Mahdis are actually very, very close to the original creations of God, which are the Ahlul Kisa. So I gave examples of Adam and Noah, peace be upon them, who are the direct soul sons of the Prince of the Believers in the soul world, and therefore they are also Mahdis. And then Noah and Adam would have their own spiritual lineage, and as you go down, then there is the rest of the souls that are created. But the answer to your question, really, Amir, which is a very good one, is that yes, the Mahdis are also from that soul that is from the Ahlul Kisa, and this is why they are who they are. This is why the greatest prophet messengers are the greatest, because they are the closest in spiritual lineage to the Ahlul Kisa.
So I have a following up question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So knowing this, that for example, the family of Prophet Muhammad and Imam Ali minhum salam and the 12 Mahdis minhum salam, they are in reality just God's emergent light that comes from His essence. So is it permissible to attribute to such personalities titles like Al-Khaliq and Al-Raziq and even Ilah, like to refer to Imam Al-Sadiq or Imam Ahmad al-Hassan or Imam Ali minhum salam as Khaliqeen, Raziqeen, or even Ilahun bil Jism, like God's embodied. These are permissible titles?
Very good question. Now, here is the thing. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, was the first prophet messenger who had accomplished the rank of Allah fil khalq. Now, this means God in creation. All of the attributes of God, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Khaliq, Al-Malik, Al-Hakim, all of those attributes, when we think about the 99 attributes plus of Allah, and there are many more, they all melt into His Rahmah, and then that Rahmah melts into the name Allah, and all of the attributes go into Allah. So Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, reached at a certain point in his life that rank where he became the manifestation of all of the attributes to their highest possible level in creation. No other prophet was able to accomplish this before him.
Yeah, like the night journey he went on, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And
the
this
night
is
journey emphasized that.
But therefore, anyone who then knew Prophet Muhammad to that perfect level was also able to attain that rank. So Imam Ali had become God in the creation, and this is beautifully explained in the book of monotheism, which I think is really, really one of the first things anybody should read when they come into this call after the Goal of the Wise. Why? Because it deals with the subject of monotheism in a way that I have never ever seen anything coming even close to it. And of course, if the Ahlul Bayt, if you want to think of them as anything, they are the teachers of Tawheed, they're the teachers of monotheism. And in this book you'll find, Brother Ali, if you have an appetite to learn about the real depths of this ocean of knowledge called monotheism, there is no book like this, and it explains these concepts in a very clear way.
Yeah,
and
as a
Ahmad al-Hassan's
layperson, it was
words are
essential
there.
for me.
And our sort of backroom staff, they've put this episode. It says, God rules the earth through a man. In this particular episode, Abba Sadiq also discusses this notion in further detail, if you are interested. But yes, the answer to your question would be, in short, if this is what you wish for, is that anybody after the Prophet Muhammad who comes as a successor to him, because he really did open up that that veil. He had this insight into the veil. He became the veil, and therefore anyone who absorbs in him or any of his successors, who are the 12 Imams, and then after that, of course, the Mahdis come, then they also occupy that Muhammadan rank, which is why Abba Sadiq said in a very recent lecture, when he was asked the question about Jesus, the Messiah, peace be upon him, praying behind the Mahdi, he said this is because all the successors of Muhammad are better than anyone who came before them, and therefore Jesus prays behind the Mahdi because the Mahdi is a successor of Prophet Muhammad, and anyone who is a true successor of the Prophet Muhammad has occupied the rank of God in creation.
That's very beautiful. And you see the riser from Sahir, and God shines forth from Mount Faron through Prophet Muhammad. So the rank is that brightness, that full effluence and light.
Good.
Are you still with us?
Hello, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the services you do for the Imam of the time. I really enjoyed what I've learned, and I'm definitely going to continue reading Goal of the Wise.
Very good, brother. I wish you all the best in your journey, and thank you for your call. We really appreciate it on the show, and
thank you.
for asking insightful questions that really increase our awe of God and His proof, His hujjah in the creation in this time. And yes, watch the videos. Also, Abba Sadiq makes it clearer. If you are a reader, then there's plenty to read. And if you are a learner through audio-visual, then we have plenty of episodes for you to consider.
Do read the Book of Tawheed, as Dr. Irfan said, because to me, as a layperson who didn't even know much about Islam, when I read this book about monotheism, it really answered so many questions and clearly distinguishes so that you do not get confused. I mean, obviously, if you're coming from more of a Shia background, you'll understand the concepts, as you obviously have a good understanding. But it will really reveal so much that these people are sent by God and are only from God.
Alhamdulillah. Take care, brother.
Take care. Mawla Ali Madad.
Yes. Ma'salam. So now we have, that was Brother Amir calling in from California. You can see that we have viewers and believers from all over the world who are tuning in because they're excited at the news of the emergence of the promised Mahdi that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his Ahlul Bayt told us about, to look for him, and when we find him, to pledge allegiance to him, even if crawling over ice. That man has indeed emerged. His name is Abdullah Hashim. His kunya is Abba as-Sadiq, and he is mentioned in the wasiyah, in the written will of the Holy Prophet that was written after his, just before his passing away, when the Prophet said, "Come, bring me something, I will write for you, after which you will never go astray." Well, that which was intended to be written was written, and we are the only ones on the face of the earth who have this written will and are using it in terms of guiding people to the true Mahdi. The true claimant is the claimant of the will. And this is where we are.
I just wanted to say as well, it's amazing. There's a brother who's obviously coming from more of a Shia background, and he's finding his scholars, his non-working scholars, are not able to answer the questions that he has. And he's looking into this religion and finding that the answers that he's been waiting for are all there. You know, this concept of God in creation, this concept of monotheism, he's realizing that through this call and through the teachings of Abu Sadiq, that there is so much esoteric and exoteric knowledge that is making him realize he has to dedicate time to this investigation.
All praise is due to God. And speaking of scholarship, let's go back to our topic of closing the loop with the topic on abortion. Now, Abu Sadiq has just spoken about these exceptions where abortion is permissible, indicating it's not just a black and white thing, a right or wrong thing, the way it is portrayed in the media when we hear these debates on abortion, where one side is saying, you will go to hellfire and burn eternally for taking the life of an innocent soul, and the other side is saying, no, this is a choice situation. There are certain places where it's a necessity and we need to give people that choice. But the debate is made very clear by the incisive sword, the intellect of the riser of the family of Muhammad when he discusses this topic. So let's go back to the the episode from the School of Divine Mysteries, and listen to the last segment on the show on the topic of abortion.
So the next question would be, okay, what if somebody doesn't have the money or the ability to pay, the payment for the restitution, and who would they pay the restitution to? And what is basically the price of a full-grown human being? The restitution amount for a whole full-grown human being would be basically the equivalent of 1 kilogram of gold, which is about 65 to 75,000 euros. If we're talking in German prices. If you murder somebody, that's the equivalent of what you would have to pay. And that's what they used to pay back in the day, the equivalent of that back in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which was anywhere around 400 to 800 dinars, depending on the slave that they were freeing, right? Because if you murdered somebody, you'd have to pay a diya, or you would have to basically buy a slave and free them. So you would pay in this day and age. In this case, you would pay to the House of Funds, to the Imam himself, and the Imam in turn would use those funds in order to feed and take care of the orphans or widows, or give a chance of survival and life to other people who are unfortunate or poor within the state. And so essentially the payment for taking the life of an innocent baby would be to supply an opportunity for life for people within the divine just state of the Imam, or you would give that money to the Imam and he would basically hand it over to those who are deserving. Then if an individual does not have the ability to pay, then they can make that clear to the Imam, and the Imam has the power to absolve individuals of their sins. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not cause an individual to bear more than they can handle. And so that's the general ruling. And so an individual who, for example, we know in Islam, in the sixth covenant, if they were fasting and they were unable to make up the fast by fasting another day, then what they would have to do is they would have to feed, for example, a poor person. And if a person was not able to feed a poor person, then it was okay if it was acceptable if the person merely felt guilt in their heart. And so the same thing is applicable now. This amount is required of the individual, and it remains required of them so long as they are alive, meaning that any time in life, if they have enough money to pay the payment, they need to pay the payment. But if they go through life and they're unable to do so, and they die, as long as they feel regret in their heart, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all forgiving and all merciful. And so this sister, I send to her my love, and I want to say that in regards to her, though, it's a different case. And the reason why it's a different case is because she stated at the outstart that all of these abortions that took place, they took place at a time where she didn't have God in her life. She wasn't religious. She hadn't believed in the religion of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad alayhi salam. And so these actions that took place, she committed them while she was in a state of jahiliyyah. She didn't know the imam of her time. So that is before, when a person pledges allegiance to the imam of their time, their slate is wiped clean. They enter into Islam, everything that came before is wiped away, and it doesn't count. And we have a clear example of this in the beginnings of Islam itself, when the Arabs in the time of the Prophet Muhammad used to bury their daughters in the sand. When Islam came and forbade that, and people ended up regretting that, the Prophet Muhammad and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not hold them to account for all of those sins that they committed before having accepted the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so she doesn't really owe anything, and she doesn't have to feel guilty, and she needs to be at peace knowing that her imam loves her and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves her. And the day that she entered into the call, she essentially was as clean as a baby, and entering into Islam and the wilaya is a good deed that wipes out everything that comes before, and the wilaya of Ali is a good deed that no bad deed can harm.
There you go. That's the topic of abortion now coming to a conclusion, and Abu Sadiq is saying that at the end of it all, never give hope of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those in the wilayah of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, they are forgiven for all sins because in them is the mercy of God manifested. So James, I think that was a very interesting kind of conclusion, the crescendo of this whole topic.
It was indeed. I mean, clearly Abu Sadiq is outlining that there is a clear restitution, and the restitution is all about aligning that karmic debt.
Yeah.
And bringing everything together, and the mercy of God is there as well. So if that deed has taken place, and you're remorseful, that's amazing as well, of course. But then once you've provided that restitution, then that money can go to help people. And subhanAllah, in the house of funds, that money will be used for the orphans, for the widows, for the oppressed people.
Yeah.
And to give life to other children that are deprived of decent circumstances and a decent upbringing. And so straight away, everything will balance out, good karma will come. And just by doing all of these things in this fashion, we see how everything realigns, and the remorse, so people don't need to feel guilt. And,
yes.
and I thought the most beautiful thing that Abu Sadiq was saying in this discussion to the sister, and in regard to the lady that had made this plea, it seemed like a plea the way that she'd written it, that she was in deep regret, deep remorse, and almost have despaired of the mercy of God. And when people feel like that, they almost feel that there's no hope left. And Abu Sadiq turned that all over and basically said that as you did this without God in your life, obviously you're completely devoid of any sin, and it's overcome, and you do not need to feel any remorse, and that's such a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And that's only the mercy of God again that can do this kind of stuff. And as we see, the non-working scholars do not do that, as Irfan has said, and it's black and white to them. And they would have condemned such a lady most likely. And that's the difference between the non-working scholars and the man sent by God.
Yes, and I think one of the key things that we take away from this whole talk is the concept of restitution. Look, restitution means what? It means that when you wrong someone, then the other person doesn't have to inflict upon you what you did to them. I mean, many Eastern philosophers who look down upon the Abrahamic religion say an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. Well, the fact of the matter is that the riser of the family of Muhammad has said that actually the concept of this penalty that can be paid in the form of money, in the form of gold, in the form of dirhams and dinars, then this is something that is available as an option to people if they choose not to exercise their right in terms of an eye for an eye. And this is again a manifestation of the mercy of God that is coming through the knowledge of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. So another really important aspect opened up there by Abu Sadiq, that this has always been the case, and the knowledgeable among the Jews were well aware of this idea within their tradition, and it wasn't always a case of an eye for an eye. So God is full of mercy, and we thank you for your question, sister. I think many people would have benefited from it, and thank you for taking the courage to come forward and sharing something that benefited the whole world. May God grant you His mercy through the wilayah of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and be in no doubt that if you're in the wilayah of Abu Sadiq, the Imam of the time, then everything is forgiven and forgotten, and God is the most merciful of those who show mercy.
Incredible.
So now, that brings to end our topic on abortion, a very fruitful topic. Lots of interesting ideas came out of it. And we move now on to our next segment. Now, we were going to do a segment on a closer look, which was done by Sister Seha, but we feel to maintain the flow of the show, we'll just have to be a little bit more adaptive,
had a caller today, didn't we? And we went
Yes.
into deep esoteric knowledge about the Imams and the Mahdis, which was very beautifully answered by Irfan.
But this is what we do on the show,
we have
Riza.
to be
we
flexible
adjust.
and adjustable. And
We're like
that's the nature of
chameleons.
an organic
Yes.
show, you know?
And and James is very knowledgeable about chameleons too. He's very interested in all topics. But before we delve into the biology of the chameleon, let's go into our next segment, which is a closer look by Kevin. James, we always cover on this show signs of the end time, so that people are very, very mindful of the fact that these natural and ecological disasters, which are occurring at breakneck speed with their frequency going up very, very quickly, that this is something that the prophets and the messengers spoke about. And
these are the signs of the birthing pains. You know, we have wars and rumors of wars, we have earthquakes, tsunamis, all these natural disasters are very keenly pointed out that the earth is almost spewing up its guts. It's saying, you know, that man has sinned greatly, it has gone away from God, and these are the consequences. Corruption has appeared on the lands and the seas on account of what the hands of men have wrought, and they must taste the punishment, lest they may return to God's mercy by finding and recognizing the Imam of their time.
Yes, and we have a person who is very perfectly suited to explaining this idea within the world religions, where man, if he does not desist in his injustice, in his sin, then he tastes the consequences of the sin in the form of a natural disaster. God is not in the business of looking down, looking for every opportunity to punish or scourge us for a mistake of ours. This is not the way He is, but He does let us. He gives us the freedom to choose our ways, and then He also lets us deal with the consequences, as Brother James said, so that we may reflect and change that behavior. So this is obviously the system that has been put into place. People in the East call it karma. People in the West will call it reaping what you sow. And this is where we move to our next segment with Brother Kevin, who is going to present the segment Nature Unleashed.
Welcome back to Nature Unleashed, where we bring you the latest, most powerful events shaping our world. This week, we focus on the deadly and unpredictable force of lightning. From tragic fatalities to widespread destruction, recent lightning strikes have claimed lives and left many in shock. Let's dive into some of the most recent and devastating incidents. In a heartbreaking incident, including 4 female footballers were killed after being struck by lightning. The footballers were seeking shelter from a storm under a nearby tree when lightning struck, taking their lives. This tragic event serves as a reminder of how quickly lightning can transform a seemingly safe moment into a catastrophe. In another tragic event, Rosanna Hashem lost her life when a tree she was near exploded after being struck by lightning, south of Sydney. The sheer force of the strike caused the tree to split apart with fatal consequences for those nearby. This shocking event emphasizes the unpredictable and deadly nature of lightning, capable of causing devastation far beyond what we might expect. In KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, a series of level 8 thunderstorms have left a trail of destruction, claiming the lives of 11 people. Among the victims was a 6-year-old boy who tragically lost his life when he got struck by lightning. The intense storms and lightning strikes have been a tragic reminder of the dangers posed by severe weather, especially for those caught in the open during such powerful events. In light of these powerful events, we turn to the words of Imam Ali, from him his peace, who foretold the increase of lightning and thunder as a sign of the approaching of the hour. He said, "Lightning will increase when the hour approaches, so much so that a man would ask, 'Who was struck this morning?' So they would answer him saying, 'So and so.'" This hadith serves as a reminder that the increasing frequency of such natural phenomena is not just a coincidence, but a sign of the approaching end times. The world around us is in flux, and these powerful events, lightning, thunder, earthquakes, and storms, are often seen as harbingers of greater trials to come. As nature continues to unleash its fury, we are urged to reflect on these signs and the world we are leaving behind. In these trying times, we must turn to God's divinely appointed messenger, the guide sent to lead humanity through the challenges of this world. These tragic events are stark reminders of the immense power of nature and our vulnerability. As lightning strikes across the globe, we are reminded that the natural world is not something we can control. It is not enough to simply acknowledge the dangers. We must take heed of the signs around us and prepare ourselves spiritually and practically for what lies ahead. The powerful forces of nature are calling us to reflect on our actions, our relationship with the earth, and the divine guidance we've been given. As we witness these powerful events, we must remember our place in this world, trust in God's wisdom, and follow the path He has laid out for us through His messenger. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and thank you for tuning into Nature Unleashed.
Thank you, Brother Kevin, for another powerful reminder of the fact that we are at God's mercy and that these signs are all around us for those who see. James, very important to be aware of what's going on in the world. And I think something Brother Kevin said may have caused a few people to roll their eyes up when he's saying, prepare yourself spiritually and prepare yourself practically. What does he mean by that? What he means by that is get on board Noah's Ark. Yeah. This is all you have to do. This is all the preparation and work you need to do. And this is, of course, referring to the ark that comes in human form through the family of the Holy Prophet, the Imams and the Mahdis. And the Mahdi that you need to be with in this day and age, his name is Abdullah Abba As-Sadiq, and he is the Ark of Salvation, the Ark of Noah in this day and age. So make your way to him and get aboard the Ark of Noah.
Exactly, Doctor. And it's very clear from Kevin's segment as well that nature is unleashed. And what does that mean? It means that we are in a time when there is much calamity, much catastrophe in the world. And fundamentally, those are natural disasters. We see them on a day-to-day basis. And it was said, obviously, critically by the prophets and messengers that there would be earthquakes in diverse places, as Jesus, peace be upon him, said. And Prophet Muhammad, of course, mentioned this himself. So it's very clear that with all these incidents that are taking place on a much more frantic level, as we see major earthquakes have increased fivefold in the last century alone, this is a clear indication we are moving into a phase where we need to be aware and awakened. And that's the whole point of saying that these signs are there to wake us up, just like a harsh father who admonishes his child, not because he wants to hurt him, because he wants to wake him up so he doesn't hurt himself. And by turning to God's messenger, that is what we do. But if we've gone so far astray to forget God in our lives and rely on our own understanding, then this is the calamity that we must endure. And God willing, we don't do that anymore, and that we turn back to God. And we see this taking place not just, as Kevin says, in certain places in Sydney. We see this all over the world. And that is what we're awakening the people to, understanding. And God is trying to do that through these signs. So whether it's earthquakes in Chile, earthquakes in the Philippines, or landslides in the Philippines, it's happening everywhere, Doctor.
Yes, it is happening. And we wanted to talk about something that happened very recently. A huge, devastating earthquake hitting the country of Myanmar in Southeast Asia, also known as Burma. But it is truly of a scale that has not hit that part of the world for a very long time, causing enormous amounts of structural damage and huge loss in life, casualties in excess of 1,800 people and counting, and many more missing. So the fatality rate is only to be estimated at this stage. We don't know how many people have lost their lives, but it's something we really wanted to bring up. And let's put a couple of headlines and images up to try and get an appreciation of the scale of the damage that has been caused. So
you can see before and after images there. So before, you can see how it's a densely packed area of these sort of almost like shanty houses, corrugated roofs perhaps, very fragile houses. But in the next image, they're gone, almost as if they've been bulldozed away. And what impact is that having on people's lives? They don't have a roof over their heads anymore. Many of these people are very poor and suffering. But ultimately, that is what happens in these situations. Bridges have been down, roads have been buckled, mass devastation in Mandalay, which is the second city of that country, Myanmar. And also, we've seen their pagodas have been destroyed in other images. And it's catastrophic. And this is what happens when you are, I dare say, as a nation en masse. We see the images there of the pagodas being toppled, literally, as if they're made of cardboard and enfolding onto the streets.
These are like religious buildings? Or?
Yeah, I dare say we would have visited some of these pagodas back in the day. And they are obviously religious temples where the Buddhists would be going every day to collect their alms, and they would go there to do their prayers. But fundamentally, we know that more devastation and the pagodas collapsing.
No, they've lost a huge kind of structural damage in the form of, you had aftershocks being felt in Bangkok and neighboring Thailand. So it is quite incredible, the degree of damage.
Seismic movements. Because obviously certain earthquakes have greater impacts than others. I think if the focal point is quite close to the surface. And
look, there's more collapse. Workers are working around the clock. It just goes to show the fragility. The Ava Bridge collapse causing damage to roads, hindering rescue efforts.
And then you get the risk of tsunamis, don't you, in many of these locations, which can be catastrophic as well.
Yeah.
And we know from the previous tsunamis that hit this Asian region back in, I think, 2004, it caused massive devastation, so much loss of life. And we see, obviously, there is clearly, going back to this karmic debt scenario that we were talking about, this reaping what you sow. And we cannot deny that the Myanmar government forces have been burning, looting and killing in remote villages of the Rohingya Muslims in the Rakhine state. And much of this knowledge has been tried to be brushed under the carpet. And 2 Reuters journalists were arrested by the Myanmar police when they were reporting on these atrocities. On these atrocities as they had taken place. So we do see an evidence here of these people, these Rohingya Muslims who have been forced, as you said, I think in the previous episode, fleeing to Bangladesh in flimsy boats in order to try and save their lives, because they fear that they're not just being persecuted, they're being raped and pillaged and killed in their own country of Myanmar by the so-called the government and Buddhist people. So that's very devastating. It's very disturbing. And the result is we see that many people are devastated and dying. Buildings are collapsing. So we see that there is no karmic balance here. And things are completely out of sync. And when things are out of sync, we see the results like this. It's very sad. It's very devastating. But God is trying to waking us up.
I mean, this is it, right? We have narrations that state that before the day of the rise, or before the coming of the hour, as the Prophet Muhammad called it, there would be an increase specifically in pandemic disease and earthquakes. These two things were mentioned on many different occasions, and there is one from a very famous hadith collection, Sahih Bukhari. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, the hour will not be established until religious knowledge will be taken away. Check, we know that. And earthquakes will be very frequent. So, this part of this karma is caused by the non-working scholars, because they are polluting the minds of the people. And I think in Myanmar, it was actually the Buddhist scholars who were actually spreading this hatred of the religious minority that inhabits their land and has been living there for many hundreds of years in very much a very peaceful way. And
they're riling up this xenophobia that you're saying, aren't they?
Yes, and I think the Prophet Muhammad's words need to be taken very, very carefully, because he's almost, if you read the narration in this way, he's saying that he mentions the taking away of religious knowledge and then the coming of the earthquakes. So, and then we use that case study example in Myanmar. We saw the taking away of knowledge and the infusing of corruption through the scholars that lived there, and then the mass genocide, really ethnic cleansing that happened in Myanmar. So these are things that we have to really consider, and it shows the truth of the Prophet Muhammad's prophethood. So yes, so now let's go to our next slide. I wanted to bring up this thing about you mentioning the increase in earthquake frequency. There is indeed a graph that shows it. So this is interesting. Now, if you look at this graph, it's showing an intense swarm beginning in December of 2020, where you can see that huge sudden spike.
I have to say, a picture paints 1,000 words. I mean, we could say this, but look at what you've got here, Irfan. That's incredible.
And it says it shows that the earthquake frequency of magnitude greater than 1 and above, shocks have increased by about 400-fold. And so the probability of large shocks is also expected to rise by a similar factor. And you can see there, James, how this graph is going up very, very steeply indeed. We have this prophecy, and now seismologists are confirming it. And the Prophet Muhammad is attributing it to the taking away of true religious knowledge. And I think, like you said, picture paints 1,000 words. We have to pay attention and pay heed to these signs. And if you are a Sunni Muslim who believes in the books of hadith that are called the Sahih Sitta books, or the 6 authentic books, then you have to believe the Prophet Muhammad and look for the coming of a man that he also said would save the day for his ummah, the Mahdi. And we are the people who are giving you glad tidings of his arrival. We are even giving you his name, and we are even giving you the source for his claim, which is the will of the Prophet that you profess to believe in. Why do you reject those people that he appointed by name, so that there remains no doubt? Why do you reject and turn your back on Muhammad al-Mustafa, the best of creation, peace be upon him and his family, when he says, those who see the coming of this banner crawl to him, even if over ice, and pledge your allegiance, for that is the Mahdi, and that Mahdi has arrived, and the signs have been fulfilled. The prophecies have come true, and there is no other individual on the face of planet Earth who has claimed the will other than Abu Sadiq and Ahmad al-Hassan, and there is no one who is carrying the banner of guidance upon which is written, the black banners upon which is written allegiance is to God, except Abba Sadiq, and no one is sharing knowledge that benefits the people, that solves their problems like Abba Sadiq. Refugee land, abortion, world peace, you name it, he's spoken about it and he's given the solution. He has written a book called The Manifesto of the Mahdi, or the Mahdi's Manifesto, that provides a roadmap towards creating a divine just state where human beings of all castes, colors and creeds can flourish, can reach their full potential. And he is the one who has come to make this happen. All he needs is supporters, followers, people who are sick to death of the lies they are repeatedly told by the news media, the propaganda that they peddle out, which is the propaganda of the elites, those people who truly control the world from behind the scenes with their billions and trillions of dollars. We have come to that crossroads. People have to really take stock and make a very quick decision now. That is God or destruction through karma, which is of our own doing. And earthquakes are coming, people. Brace yourself. If you think this one that happened in Myanmar, which shows us how fragile we are as a civilization, as much as we would like to tout progression and how much we have come and how much we've advanced. Well, look what one earthquake did. It completely crippled a whole country. It has brought Myanmar down to its knees. People are still looking to salvage bodies from the debris. There's nothing they can do. And this is what is coming, unfortunately, if people are not waking up to the fact that the Mahdi has arrived.
So, very beautifully said, and you're saying that this is clearly a time when the Al-Qaim would arrive. Many narrations, Jafar Sadiq and the family of Muhammad have said the Qaim will not appear unless his appearance is preceded by great terror, earthquakes, sedations, calamities, spread of the plague, killing among the Arabs, great disagreements amongst the people, separation in religion, and bad conditions until people would wish to day and night to die because of what madness they see among the people. So it really is a sign that we are in those times, and we see this separation in religion that's catastrophic now. We see sectarian division to the point where people who claim to believe in the same God and messenger, whether they're Christians or Muslims, are fighting and killing one another. We see that between the likes of Ukraine and Russia. They all profess to believe in the same prophet messenger, but they're still at arms with each other. And this is happening as well in lands like Syria and beyond, where the same people that claim to be believing in Prophet Muhammad and the one true God are literally at arms with each other, are slaughtering one another, and many people are forced to flee for their lives, but they do not find refuge in the Muslim lands. The likes of Saudi Arabia, the so-called custodians of the Holy House, do not provide refuge for these people that are literally fleeing for their lives. And just as Imam Ali would say, even if they are not your brother in faith, even though they are, what about your brother in humanity? And if you cannot even do this, then what religion remains? What prophet are you believing in if you are abandoning humanity and the rights of the people? And we see that en masse today, and whether it's earthquakes, whether it's catastrophes on a natural disaster level, it is also war. And anyone that claims we are in a state of peace needs to have their minds tested. And their ears rinsed out, because clearly we are in a state of war. Pandemics are, as you know, Dr. Irfan, becoming a lot more virulent. The recent COVID crisis seems to have been brushed under the carpet almost now, but it is clearly evident that more viruses are emerging from the ice and whatever you have with the rising temperatures. And many of these are dormant viruses that are likely to cause mass catastrophes again. And we've been warned by the Holy Imam, peace be upon him, that as much as there was a small animal that caused a catastrophe, which subhanAllah refers back to the COVID virus, there would be more. There would be more viruses that will come in the future. And he warned about long COVID as well, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And these things are all things that have been spoken to us by the prophets and the messengers that God sent, that all Muslims believe in, that all most Jews actually believe in, and also the Christians. Now, Jesus spoke about this. Moses and the rabbis, there's so much literature now about these conditions occurring because of the absence of true spiritual knowledge.
Exactly.
And one of those things that we see in the news, and I'm keen to, I know that you're very passionate about this, is this inequality, which is we're also seeing in the world. And Abba Sadiq dedicated a whole chapter to this thing where he's showing this divide between rich and poor that's increasing at breakneck speed as well. And even within the richer countries, when Ali and I were doing an episode very recently, we spoke about the life expectancy in a borough that is in a posh part of London versus something in Blackpool. And the life expectancy in a borough of Blackpool is actually less than many sub-Saharan African countries, 50 years of age, for goodness sake. And then you've got somebody in London at 75. So even within countries, within so-called richer countries, this extreme inequality lies. And that example was from the UK. And I think you have another one for us today.
Yeah, wealth inequality, injustice and separation are becoming a lot more catastrophic in life today. And that's a sign of these birthing pains and these growing pains that Jesus would refer to. And we know today in the city of Bristol, overnight, swiftly, just a few days ago, they were placing up these barricades on a road which separates between a very rich area and a very poor area.
Who's putting up these barricades?
The local council.
Wow.
So the local council are going there.
In Bristol?
Yeah, in the night time at 3 a.m. And they're having a police support unit as well, because obviously they're aware that the neighbours and the residents will probably get very upset.
Yeah.
And they're there with tasers, ready to taser anyone that objects to this mission that they have in place.
Okay.
And they're putting up these barricades in the middle of the road to separate these territories.
Wow.
And they're implying that this is going to result in some kind of ethnic cleansing, in the sense that they're saying that you're better than me and I'm not able to go
so there's been a lot of violence, I suppose.
I mean, it's inciting violence. It has.
So it's like instead of the Berlin Wall, we have the Bristol Wall, but it's not on political ideology, it's on wealth and income inequality.
Yeah, so generally the area in Barton Hill in Bristol is mainly sort of Somalians and working class
I see.
white people, and many of them are hard-working people that are just trying to earn a crust. But it seems like they're trying to create this kind of separation or division from the so-called posher neighbourhood.
And how does this make you feel as somebody who hails from Bristol? Let's not leave out that little detail.
Well, I think it's horrendous. I think it's horrific that you treat...
I've never heard of this happening in England.
No, and the fact that it's only just started now, I dare say maybe it's a testing zone to see how it works and whether they've... put this out in other areas of the country.
Yes.
And it creates this sort of ghettoization, this segregated ghetto concept. We know we had it in the past with Jewish ghettos. And as soon as you create that ghetto environment...
Yes, James, here's a critical thing now.
Yeah.
Let's break this down. And this is why I wanted James to speak about this news piece, because we've always had ghettos and we've always had areas that we knew were notorious for crimes or a certain group of people living in there. This is very well known, and the UK is no different from America. We know, for example, this is the Chinese Quarter, this is where the Indians live, this is where the Mexicans live, etc. That's always been accepted. But now, creating a barrier, creating a small wall of China, if you will, within a country, within a city,
within a region.
That is crazy. How big was this wall, and when was the construction begun?
Only just a few days ago.
And the council is the one that actually...
The local council is the one that put it out there, but the fact that they had a police presence implies they knew it would mark with resistance, they knew it would inflame the people and the residents, and it creates this distrust, it creates this disunity between the rich and the poor. And then, as our dear brother said in one of the shows recently, it creates that scenario where the parents and the children seeing the other neighbours playing with expensive toys, having a nice lifestyle, having a good environment, fancy cars. It creates this level of envy.
Wow.
And this incites people to feel...
deep.
Yeah, because then people are going to feel like, why have they got and I haven't got? And this envy is rising up gangs, and then this whole aspect of like violence and jealousy, which creates conflict in cities, conflicts in lives. And that's why the model that Abba Sadiq is proposing for the refugee land is that everybody has their equal rights and nobody has more than they need or less than they need. And as soon as you equate that and you balance these things out, then all of these horrendous crimes that result. And that's why when Abba Sadiq is implying that a lot of these crimes that have taken place is because people are forced to steal just to survive. And so those crimes are turned back on the ones that made them commit these crimes.
When was this wall put up? I'm curious.
Just a few days ago.
A few days ago.
But it's only been mentioned in a few isolated press scenarios.
I see. And how like, what's the distance and range that it covers? Does it fully enclose the area, or is it just...
it's literally just almost like some bollards with some huge concrete blocks that are basically blocking off the road. So, you can walk through the zone.
You can walk, but you can't drive.
You can walk, but you can't drive through the zone.
Wow.
But it's creating a clear demarcation zone. And when you're creating these demarcation zones, you're basically saying it's a border, it's an area of distinction. So what is the distinction between those areas? It's only class and wealth. So it's like a caste system. I mean, how are we doing that in the 21st century?
Yeah, it's like a form of, almost like a less malevolent version of apartheid in a sense.
It is. And it's brushed under the carpet, but the reality is, as I say one more time, that if you have a police presence there with tasers, they're expecting
to enforce the law,
they're expecting some revolt, and local traders.
So they're expecting what?
Well.
They're expecting for the crime rates to come down as a result of this building of these blockades?
I presume, the intention is to reduce crime rates.
Yes.
To create, but then if you're doing it in an enclave, it's like saying, well, we can contain it here.
Yeah.
But what is containing? It's not a solution.
Yes.
It's like trying to push away the problem. And local traders are affected, obviously, because the roads are problematic now.
Yes.
So obviously they're not getting the transport coming through. They're not getting a free flow of cars. So local traders are affected, and they're not able to get their deliveries as well.
So,
local Somalian workers and that kind of thing, who are trying to run a sustainable, honourable business.
So as a believer in God, as a man of reason, as a person who cherishes the idea of logic, do you think that this is a good solution to the problem, or do you think it's going to aggravate things?
I dare say it's on a micro scale. It's like Trump politics, where you're putting up these huge walls between Mexico and the USA. It's like on a micro scale.
Yeah, here's my thing, right? Now, you talk about like, the issue is what? The issue is inequality. The issue is that these people have too much, these people have nothing. Well, then maybe the government should help those people who have nothing with a little bit more. Maybe that's the solution.
Give them training.
But instead, they're building these blockades that are stopping the people from conducting their lives in a normal way, to have their business.
Exactly, they can't operate their businesses properly. And it reminds me again of this whole concept of the elites now, when they have these bunkers, underground bunkers, or shelters, because they think there might be a nuclear fallout and they want to protect themselves and their families, or they have panic rooms. In other words, an area where they can retreat to if there is an attack on their house, on their livelihood. And that's because they know they're living in an excess. So why would you have a panic room unless you know you're living in excess?
Indeed, and this is why this country of England in particular has become famous for a personality that existed a few hundred years ago, who has now become a legend by the name of Robin Hood, because he saw this inequality between the haves and the have-nots, and he decided to play the role of the equalizer. And initially, and who wanted him dead was the ruling elites, but he was actually a hero to the poor. And his solution, I think, made a lot more sense than the building of these barricades and blockades. And of course, the rich would say, well, it's not our fault that these people didn't work hard and earn their keep like we did. We were disciplined, etc., etc. Completely overlooking the fact that many of these people who are in these positions of poverty and lack, and it's actually a very much more complicated story than that. And people unfortunately seem to have amnesia when it comes to these matters, because they forget that the conditions that they were raised in, their opportunities that they were given, were much, much more so curtailed than those who grew up with privilege. And these things have to be looked at by those people who claim to represent the best interests of the people. And this is really breaking news that needs coverage, because this is happening in a first world country, a country that says that their values are of those of the welfare state, to take care of the poor, where a government sits in that particularly claims to have that ambition and goal. And then we see this happening, these lines and walls and bridges. Instead of building bridges, they're building walls, and this is never going to be a lasting solution. In fact, it's going to aggravate the situation. But this is the times that we live in, people. This is the age we live in. And it is for this reason that we do this show, so that we can highlight these cases and these breaking news that is not really given the coverage it ought to be, in the context that it ought to be. And this is why Abu Sadiq has created these two channels, one in Arabic and Farsi predominantly, and the other one in the languages of the West. And thank you very much for sharing that story. Is there anything else in that story that you think it's important for people to highlight?
I think we've covered most of it. I mean, the key concept is really just, as you say, creating walls instead of building bridges. I think that's a very good way of outlining it, because you are literally creating barriers between understandings of people. And when you create a wall, it's like a non-working scholar who wants to be like that rock in the river that doesn't drink from the source and doesn't want you to either. You know, and it's the same whether it's in religion, whether it's in society or economics. It cannot be allowed to prevail, because it's denying people an opportunity to thrive and even survive in their lives. People that are just trying to literally earn a living and support their families are being not allowed to do that by the introduction of these barricades, and they're not being consulted in these matters. You know, they're not having a discussion. It's just happening completely unbeknownst to them in the middle of the night. And then they're wondering why the authorities, when they're up in arms about this. Well, of course, how would you be if your livelihood is being deprived? And then if they can't keep up their mortgage payments, who's going to be recompensing them? Who's going to be helping them out? Is it going to be those same authorities that are denying them? Or are they going to be the ones knocking on the door, demanding the payments, or removing their house from them?
Yes.
Which will then leave them on the streets. And then who's going to pick up the price for that? The
very
taxpayers.
Good questions. Very, very pertinent and relevant questions, and questions for all of the people watching to consider. And the riser of the family of Muhammad, Abu Sadiq, the Mahdi, the man who has the wisdom and spirit of God in this day and age, has provided a very simple solution. He says his analysis is as follows in this particular situation, or the topic of wealth inequality. He says that those people who die hungry, they die hungry because somebody else has taken their share. The God who created them also created their sustenance. So if their sustenance is not reaching them, it is because somebody else has taken it. And this is the injustice that we are seeing in the world. And the solution is a very beautifully simple solution. And I smile because this is often the case with Abu Sadiq and the prophets and messengers, that they have these very clear-cut solutions. Abu Sadiq, just as he gave the solution to a war in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Palestinians in a very famous episode now on the School of Divine Mysteries, he also talks about this issue, and he says, well, the solution is as follows. We get the money and we distribute it evenly as per the needs of the people. I mean, it's really so easy and simple. Why do some people have billions and billions in their bank account that they, even if they had 3 lives, 3 incarnations, they would not be able to spend that money, and other people cannot eat their evening meal and die of starvation? This is not what God wants. This is not something He will allow in the divine just state. And that alone is an idea worth fighting for. That alone is an idea worth spreading. And this is something that the Ansar are doing in a big way.
I think that's a critical point, and just to carry on with what you're saying, it's been clarified as well by the prophet messengers that God has hidden the sustenance of the poor in the rich. So that means it's a test upon these people. It's a test on the affluent ones, those who have been given a greater ability to earn money, primarily because of their luck or whatever the purpose is of that. And their duty and their obligation is then to share that out evenly. And if they don't do that, they failed in that mission. So it is a great test upon the people of affluence to share out their wealth, in order that the good people who are deprived of that opportunity, are born into debt and suffering, are able to equate that balance. So just like Jesus would say, and the apostles would say, when they established the mini divine just state after the death of Jesus, they would put their possessions, everything they had, at the feet of the apostles. Because in essence, by going into that mission of God, and you give everything you have, you get everything you need, but not the greed. So then everyone who doesn't have, they get in their need as well. So it balances everything out. And then everybody lives within their needs, and everybody has access to everything. So that's a great mission that Jesus came with, and the apostles were approving of, that obviously everyone puts everything into the camp, and then everyone gets everything back.
Yes.
So it's simple, and if we all do that, then we live with excess for the world. There's no need anymore, because God is like that, and we know that Abu Sadiq has come as Nunrial, the angel of sustenance. So if you join his camp, then of course there is enough sustenance for everyone, and there always has been. God has made this earth and this dominion for Adam, as he said in the beginning, I'm giving you dominion over the animals and the plants and all of the earth, because this earth was made great by our Lord, that we would have enough for everybody. And just as the animals, they always believe that there's enough for themselves, and they do not make up storehouses to keep everything overnight, because they know that God's sustenance will always provide them. Yes. But mankind, in his greed and in his lack of going to God, has stored up his houses in the elites, and now the repercussions are coming back to mankind for these actions.
Yes, and very beautifully said, James. And what an unimaginably beautiful world we would live in if we finally allowed God to rule, if we allowed the messenger from him to rule on earth as God does in heaven. We would know a beautiful utopia where there would be no stress, there would be no stress-related illnesses, there would be no diabetes or hypertension or heart attacks or strokes or Alzheimer's disease. People would just live lives of contentment. They would wake up in the morning, the sun would be shining, they would be with their children in the park, reading, speaking, eating, drinking. There would be a state of plenty.
And spiritual involvement would take place.
Yes,
because the whole point of this suffering and debt servitude is it enables a satanic state where people are unable, if they're literally struggling to put food on the table and their livelihoods are being deprived and they can't keep up with their mortgage payments, how are they going to spiritually evolve? How are they going to research into esoteric knowledge and feel spiritual?
Yes, that's a good point. The scientific advances that are promised to come under the reign of the riser of the family of Muhammad are unprecedented. It's something even beyond the most greatest of imaginings, because this is where that knowledge is poured into vessels that have been cleansed of the ana, the I, the ego, the selfish desires. When that happens, we will see a world which is going to be something from those things like we hear about Atlantis, these great civilizations that build the pyramids and so on and so forth.
Incredible when you think about the knowledge of Atlantis, what they could do and what they understood. And a lot of that we don't know yet, and Abu Sadiq will reveal much more about that. We know Plato alluded to that in his Critias and Timaeus books. And he had great knowledge from Solon, he had great knowledge from all of these people. But in essence, what is the point in any of us even investigating these matters until we resolve the crisis in our hands? And that is that humanity is at breaking point, that these global catastrophes in natural disasters, in wars, in epidemics are raining down upon us because we've neglected God. And what is the point of going into deep spiritual awakening until we go back to God first? God is fundamental to that, and God is saying enough to all this tyrant and oppression, and until you go back to me, there is no point in delving into these esoteric matters. And that's why Abu Sadiq has said, and the Imam said, discipline before knowledge, and that there is a wage to pay for the knowledge, and that is putting humanity first, I believe, Doctor.
Yes, imagine waking up without palpitations, without having to quickly down that coffee as you get into the car with your heart pounding, wondering if you'll be able to keep your job for the day, a job that you neither care for nor are enthusiastic or passionate about, and the whole goal of this job is just to pay off a mortgage that is breaking your back, knowing that there is not enough money for the groceries, and that your mother has breast cancer that spread, you have to go see her straight afterwards. All of these different things that people live with, these nightmarish scenarios, would evaporate. In fact, cancer would cease to exist on this planet in the state, or in the divine just state. It would just be merely known as that constellation that we see in the sky. And we have this opportunity before us. We have this moment in human history. It will happen. It is promised to happen. But really, we have the choice of, will it happen with us scouring for 40 years in the desert, in the wilderness, before we lumber our way home, or are we going to get there as quick as possible and put all this misery and suffering into the pages of history and then move forward as a great civilization which is built upon the ideals of love and mercy and kindness towards others? And this is really what Abba Sadiq is preaching. He is saying that let's end this suffering. We've tried every single other alternative method of governance. None of it has worked. It always inevitably spirals into power and wealth going into the hands of the few, while the many suffer and struggle and die unnecessarily because of the greed of a few people. So this is the promise and the message of this call to come and build Eden on earth, to go back into the garden. And this is only going to happen when we finally submit to the choice of God and stop trying to claim something that is not our right.
Yeah, we're trying to claim sovereignty for ourselves if we take that stance. And it's said clearly in the Quran, only God grants sovereignty. So when mankind is claiming sovereignty for themselves and they're claiming leadership for themselves, whether it's through Walaya Fakir or law of the jurisprudence, and they say they're signs of God, or they say they're monarchs of God, but they have no divine right. The divine right of the kings, it's all well and good saying you're a monarch, but if you're not from divine right, if you've not been appointed by God, then you have no right to speak in the name of God. And Abba Sadiq has declared that himself. And he has even said himself that if Jainism was the truth, if Shintoism was the truth, if Baha'i faith was the truth, then he would embrace it. But he is looking for God, he found God, and he is from God. And so that is how we work the principle. Are you speaking in the name of God? And if you're not, you do not have the right to talk in the name of God. And we know that if you are leading as a fallible person, if you are leading as a person who is still controlled by your whims and your desires, then power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
And then as a result of that, you will lead your nation into sin and tyranny. And we say fundamentally, know them by their fruits. And we see today the fruits of all of these leaders in politics and religion are deeply rotten. And as much as they are rotten, it has driven their nations into disrepair and this wealth inequality that has reached preposterous levels, where people in a rich nation, like Irfan has clarified, like the UK, in some parts are literally dying under the age of 50, where other people are living to the ripe old age of 80 plus. How can that all happen in the same nation, under the same governance, and for the government officials to sleep at peace at night in these kind of scenarios? You know, in whatever nation it is, it doesn't matter whether you go from east to west. And this is the pandemic of the world today. And the reality is that corruption has appeared on the lands and the seas on account of what the hands of men have wrought, because we've allowed these people to lead over us. And we are tasting that punishment, and that is these natural disasters. That is the pandemics. That is the wars. But once we taste this, we are now granted the ability to go back to God by seeking out the man sent by God, the one that has come forward with the Mahdi's manifesto, who has come forward with the goal of the wise and the book of monotheism through Ahmad al-Hassan, and of course Abba al-Sadiq from his peace today, who is the riser of truth, who is the one who has come to restore the justice and humanity so that we can live in peace and not feel the suffering that we have felt on such a deep level. And that karmic justice is coming, and whether you like it or not, it is here to stay. And it's victory or victory for the Qaim of the family of Muhammad. And I'm so pleased that we have this opportunity to share this knowledge with you.
Thank you, James. Let's rise up in unison, hold the hands of the Qaim so that he can usher us back into the Garden of Eden where we are supposed to be. Thank you very much for joining us today on another edition of Rise Up. We'll be back again, same time, same place. Until then, peace be with you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.